It isn't the tiredness you feel after a long run, or the heaviness in your eyes after a sleepless night. It is something deeper, something that lives in the chest quietly, like a stone that you have been carrying for so long that you almost forgot it was ever placed there. This is the story of a woman named Alina, and before I tell you what she did, I need you to understand who she was, because too often we only see the moment someone finally breaks free. We don't see the years that came before, the silent years, the invisible years, the years when a person pours everything they have into the hands of people who never once looked up to say thank you. Alina was 34 years old when our story begins. She had warm brown eyes that always looked like they were listening, even when she was tired. She had dark hair she usually kept pulled back because there was always something to do, always something to attend to, always someone who needed something from her. She was the kind of woman who remembered everyone's coffee order, everyone's food preference, everyone's allergies, not because she had written them down, but because she genuinely cared. At least that was how it started. She had married into the Harrington family 6 years ago. Her husband, Daniel, was a kind-hearted man, a little lost sometimes, but gentle. She had loved him with everything she had. She still did. But around Daniel came a world she had not fully anticipated. A large, loud, demanding family that treated their family gatherings like productions, and somehow, without anyone ever quite saying it out loud, Alina had become the producer. There were 14 of them in total. Daniel's parents, Richard and Margaret, his older brother, Thomas, and Thomas's wife, Sandra, who had very specific opinions about tablecloth colors. Thomas and Sandra's 3 children, Oliver, age 12, and the twins, Lily and Grace, who were 9, Daniel's younger sister, Caroline, and her husband, Naveen, who always arrived late and left early, but somehow still managed to eat more than anyone else. Caroline's mother-in-law, Mrs. Patel, who visited every holiday and spoke mostly in disapproving glances. Daniel's Aunt Patricia, who was technically the fun one, but whose idea of fun was asking Alina loudly, in front of everyone, when she and Daniel were planning to have children. And finally, Daniel's cousin, Hugh, who nobody particularly liked but who always showed up anyway, eating the last of everything and leaving his dishes on the counter directly above the dishwasher. 14 people. And Alina was the one who fed them, organized them, cleaned up after them, managed the sleeping arrangements, decorated the house, planned the activities, remembered the dietary restrictions, soothed the arguments, and smiled through all of it. Every holiday, every birthday, every long weekend, every family reunion, for 6 years. And for 6 years, Alina had told herself it was fine, that this was what love looked like, that this was what family meant, that she was building something at home, a tradition, a sense of belonging for everyone around her. But there is a difference between choosing to give and being expected to give. And somewhere along those 6 years, Alina had drifted from one side of that line to the other, so gradually she hadn't even noticed it happening. Until a Tuesday afternoon in late March, it started with a group message. Alina was at her desk working. She had a job, a real one, as a graphic designer for a small but growing agency downtown. She had deadlines and clients and a boss who was patient, but only to a point. She had her own world, her own responsibilities, her own calendar full of things that had nothing to do with ironing tablecloths or finding out which grocery store still carried the specific brand of cranberry sauce that Margaret insisted was the only acceptable one. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it between two paragraphs of a design brief. It was the family group chat. The one called Harrington Family read, a name that had always felt slightly optimistic to her. The message was from Margaret. Good news, everyone. Richard and I have confirmed the Easter gathering will be at Daniel and Elena's again this year. Elena, darling, we were thinking the weekend of the 15th. That gives you almost 3 weeks, same as last year, but maybe this time we could do a proper sit-down dinner on Saturday night instead of the buffet. The buffet felt a little informal. Also, Patricia wants to know if you'll do those little place card holders you made in December. Everyone loved those. And Sandra mentioned the guest room needs the new curtains before they arrive because the light comes in too early and Oliver has been having trouble sleeping. Can't wait. So wonderful to have a place to gather. You're such a blessing to this family. Elena read it once. Then again she set her phone face down on the desk. She picked it back up and read it a third time. Not one question, not a single would that work for you, or is there anything we can help with, or even the basic courtesy of asking whether she wanted to host at all. Just confirmation, as though her home, her time, her energy, her weekends were simply resources available to the family, a facility to be booked, a service to be rendered. She thought about last Easter. She had spent 4 days preparing. She had made a full roast with 3 side dishes and 2 desserts from scratch. She had arranged the guest room, laundered all the extra linens, bought a new set of towels because Sandra had made a comment the year before about the old ones being thin. She had organized an Easter egg hunt for the children, complete with hand-painted eggs and little prizes inside, because she had read somewhere that children remember the details. She had handled 3 separate moments of family tension, one between Thomas and his father about money, one between Caroline and Sandra about parenting styles, and one between Mrs. Patel and Patricia that Elena still didn't fully understand, but had somehow managed to smooth over with a well-timed pot of tea. And at the end of that long, exhausting weekend, as everyone was leaving, Margaret had hugged her and said, "You make it look so easy, Elena." She had smiled. She had said, "It's nothing," but it wasn't nothing. It was everything. It was every quiet hour of planning, every sore back from cleaning, every dollar from their shared grocery budget. Every piece of herself she had folded into that weekend like origami, making something beautiful that other people would admire and then walk away from. She had said it was nothing because that was what she always said. Because she was Elena and Elena handled things. She sat very still at her desk for a long moment. Outside the window a bird landed on the ledge and looked at her with complete indifference. The afternoon light fell across her hands. Something shifted in her quietly, not dramatically, not with thunder, just a gentle, decisive, irreversible shift, like a key turning in a lock. She picked up her phone. She opened a different app, and she began looking at flights. It had been 5 years since Elena had taken a vacation. A real one, not a family trip, not a holiday spent hosting, not a long weekend that was technically a break but practically a performance. 5 years since she had gone somewhere and been accountable to no one. She remembered it distantly, the way you remember a song from childhood. She had gone to a small coastal town, alone, before she and Daniel had gotten serious. She had stayed in a tiny rented room with a window that overlooked the sea. She had eaten when she was hungry, slept when she was tired, read 3 books in 4 days, walked along the water every morning, and let the wind be the only thing that made any demands on her. She had come home feeling like herself again. Fully, completely herself. She wanted that. She needed that. She searched flights for the week of the 15th. There was a destination she had bookmarked years ago and never visited. A small island, warm weather, a little hotel with good reviews and a photograph that showed a porch with 2 chairs and an ocean view that looked so peaceful it almost hurt to look at. The price was manageable. She had savings, her own savings, from her own income, money she had kept quietly separate, not out of secrecy, but out of a lifelong habit of keeping something that was just hers. She booked it, flight there on the 14th, return on the 21st, 7 days. She pressed confirm. And then she sat back in her chair and felt something move through her chest that it took her a moment to identify. Relief, pure, clean, uncomplicated relief. She closed her eyes and let it settle. Then she opened the family group chat. She typed carefully. She typed slowly. She chose each word the way you choose stones to cross a river, deliberately, placing each one firmly before moving to the next. Hi everyone, just seen Margaret's message. I won't be available that weekend. I'll be out of town. I hope you all have a wonderful Easter. I know you'll figure something out. She read it back. She sent it. Then she put her phone in her desk drawer, closed it, and returned to her design brief. The response was not immediate. There was a gap of about 12 minutes, which, in Harrington family communication terms, was the equivalent of a stunned silence. Then the messages began. Margaret first, out of town. Where are you going, darling? Is everything all right? Then Sandra, wait, does this mean the gathering is canceled? I've already told the kids. Then Patricia, Elena honey, what does this mean? We always do Easter at yours. Then Caroline, can we call? I'm confused. Then, most painfully, a private message from Thomas that simply read, Is this a joke? Elena read them all. She felt the familiar pull, the deep, trained instinct to immediately reassure, to soften, to apologize, to find a way to make everyone comfortable again. She felt it the way you feel a tide pulling at your ankles. Strong, insistent, old. She didn't respond. Not yet. That evening, Daniel came home to find her sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, calm and quiet, the way the sea is quiet just before it decides something. My mom called me, he said carefully, setting his bag down. I know, Elena said, she's pretty upset. I know that too. Daniel sat down across from her. He had the look of a man who loves his wife and loves his family, and is standing exactly in the middle of a very wide river, trying to figure out which bank to swim toward. Elena, he said gently, what's going on? And she told him, not with anger, not with accusations. Not in the way you unpack a grievance when it has been sitting in the dark too long and starts to smell like resentment. She told him quietly, clearly, with the steady voice of a woman who has finally decided to be honest, not to wound anyone, but simply because honesty was the only thing she had left to offer. She told him about the group message, about the word confirmation, about the 4 Easters and the 5 Christmases and the 3 Thanksgivings and the birthdays and the long weekends, about the place card holders and the curtains and the cranberry sauce and the smooth Dover arguments, about coming home from other people's vacations more tired than when she left, about being called a blessing and a treasure and so wonderful in the same breath, as being assigned more tasks she hadn't agreed to. She told him that she was going away for a week, alone, that she had booked the flight and the hotel, and that she intended to go. And then she said quietly, "I love this family, Daniel. I love you, but I am not their nanny. I am not their maid. I am not a venue, and I need a week to remember who I am outside of all of this." The kitchen was very quiet. Daniel looked at her for a long time, and then something happened that Elena had not expected. His eyes grew soft, not defensive, not wounded. Soft, "I know," he said just that, 2 words, "I know." He said again, and his voice was low and careful and full of something that sounded like shame. Not the kind that lashes out, but the kind that looks inward. "I've been watching you carry all of this for years, and I kept telling myself you were fine because you never said you weren't, and that was lazy of me, Elena. That was wrong." She looked at him. "I should have said something," he continued, "to my mother, to all of them, a long time ago. You shouldn't have had to get to this point for me to say it." The silence between them was different now. It was the kind of silence that holds 2 people rather than separating them. Elena reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm going," she said. "I know." He said, "You should go. You deserve to go." He paused. "I'll handle the family." She raised an eyebrow very slightly, but he saw it. He almost smiled. "I know that look. You're not sure I can do it." "And I didn't say anything. You didn't have to." He squeezed her hand. "Let me try." What happened in the Harrington family group chat over the next 72 hours was, by any measure, an event. Daniel sent a message, measured, warm, but clear. He said that Elena needed rest, that she had been carrying the weight of their family gatherings almost entirely alone for years, that it was not fair, and that he supported her completely in taking time for herself. He said that Easter could still happen, but that it would need to be a collective effort, and asked if people would be willing to step up. The responses were, to put it gently, varied. Margaret was quiet for a whole day, which was itself a form of communication. Sandra sent a long message about logistics that was technically cooperative, but had a distinct undertone of "this is very inconvenient for me." Patricia, surprisingly, wrote back quickly, "Oh, thank goodness someone finally said it. I've felt guilty for years watching Elena do everything. Count me in for whatever's needed." Caroline called Daniel directly and cried a little, not from anger, but from something that sounded more like recognition. She told him she hadn't realized, that she'd assumed Elena liked doing it, that she'd thought if something was wrong, Elena would have said so. She smiled every time, Caroline said. She always seemed fine. "I know," Daniel said. "She's very good at seeming fine." Thomas was prickly for about 2 days, and then, quietly, offered to bring the main dish and handle the setup at his parents' house, where the gathering would now be held instead. Even Hugh, improbably, volunteered to bring dessert, though he specified he would be picking it up from a bakery because he didn't cook, which was at least more honest than pretending otherwise. Mrs. Patel, when informed through Caroline, apparently said something in her own language that Caroline translated as roughly meaning, "about time," and Margaret was the one Elena had wondered about most. Margaret, who had always been warm to Elena in the way that comes naturally to people who are also, without quite meaning to be, used to getting what they want, who had genuinely loved her, Elena believed that, but who had loved her in the way you love a reliable thing, without ever quite considering what it costs. On the 3rd day, Margaret called Elena directly, Elena answered, because running away had never been what this was about. It was about something different, about standing in her own life and speaking her own truth, not disappearing. "Elena," Margaret said. "Margaret, a pause. I owe you an apology." The words came slowly, like they were being chosen carefully. "I've been sitting with this for a few days, because I wanted to be sure I understood what I was apologizing for. Not just the usual, 'I'm sorry if I upset you,' a real one." Elena was quiet, listening. "I think," Margaret continued, "that I've been taking you for granted for a long time, not on purpose, but not on purpose either, if that makes sense. I noticed you were capable, and I let that become an excuse to rely on you. I let capable become invisible, and that wasn't fair. You're not our staff, Elena. You're our family. There's a difference. There should be a difference." Elena felt her throat tighten just slightly. "Thank you for saying that, Margaret," she said. "I mean it. I know you do." Another pause. "Are you really going? Somewhere nice?" "Yes," Elena said, and despite herself she smiled. "Somewhere with a porch and an ocean view." She could hear Margaret smiling too, faintly. "Good. That sounds lovely. It does, doesn't it? Daniel loves you very much, you know." "I know. I love him too. You'll come back to us." The question was simple. Under it was something much larger, not just about the vacation, but about everything. About whether the bridge between them was still standing after all of this. Whether you could speak the truth to the people who love you and still have them standing there when the truth had settled. "I'll come back," Elena said. "I just needed to remember the way home, to myself first." The morning of the 14th was ordinary in every external way. Elena woke before her alarm. The bedroom was still dark, the kind of dark that belongs to the hour just before the world decides to begin. Daniel was asleep beside her, one arm loosely extended on her side of the bed, as though even in sleep he was reaching for her. She dressed quietly. She had packed the night before lightly, deliberately, with a satisfaction she hadn't felt in years. One small suitcase, a few books, a journal she had not written in for months, because there was always something more pressing to do. Her good headphones, a swimsuit she had bought on impulse in January and never worn. She made herself a cup of coffee and stood in the kitchen, the house quiet around her. Then she went back to the bedroom. She sat on the edge of the bed. Daniel stirred. "Hey," he said, voice thick with sleep. "Hey." He turned and looked at her in the dim light. "You okay? More than okay," she said softly. He reached up and touched her face. The way people touch things they love without needing to explain the gesture. "Go," he said. "Rest. Actually rest." She pressed her hand over his for a moment. "The cranberry sauce," she said, deadpan. He blinked. "Your mother mentioned it. The specific brand, Elena. Fine." She laughed softly. "Go figure it out." "I'll figure it out." She leaned down and kissed his forehead, the way you kiss something precious. "I'll be back in a week," she said. "I know," he said. "We'll be here." And she left. The island was everything the photograph had promised, and several things it hadn't. The air was different there, warmer, obviously, but more than that, slower, the kind of air that doesn't hurry. Elena stepped off the small connecting flight and felt it on her face, and something in her chest unclenched that she hadn't known was clenched. The hotel was small. It was run by a husband and wife who had clearly been doing this for decades and had reached the stage of hospitality that comes not from training but from genuine pleasure in other people. The wife, whose name was Dora, showed Alina to her room, and opened the door onto a porch with 2 chairs and a view of the ocean that was, in real life, even more affecting than the photograph. "Breakfast is whenever you want it," Dora said. "The kitchen closes at 10, but I'll leave things out if you come down late. The beach path is through the garden. There's a market in town on Thursdays, and if you need anything." She pointed to a small handwritten card on the nightstand. "And that's the number, but most guests find they don't need anything at all." She smiled and left. Alina stood on the porch for a long time, just standing, looking. Below her, the ocean moved in its ancient, unhurried way, coming in, pulling back, coming in again, never once concerned about whether anyone was watching. Boats on the far horizon. A sky so wide and blue it felt like an apology for every gray day she had ever endured. She sat in one of the chairs. She did not open her phone. She did not make a list. She simply sat, and she breathed. The first day, she slept. Not immediately as she walked the beach in the afternoon, long slow miles in bare feet, with the sand warm between her toes and the water just cold enough at the edges to feel awake. She ate dinner alone at a small table by the window, and the solitude felt not like loneliness, but like space, like a room she hadn't known she needed. She slept that night deeply, without dreaming, without waking, without the low-grade anxiety that had become so familiar she'd stopped noticing it until it was gone. The second day, she read. She sat in the porch chair from morning until the light changed and she had to move inside, and she read an entire novel, something she hadn't done in years. A story about 2 people who kept almost finding each other. A slow and tender love story that made her cry a little on a train platform, seen near the middle. She didn't wipe the tears. She let them come. It was a good kind of crying, the kind that cleans something. The third day she opened her journal. She hadn't planned to write. But Dora had left fresh coffee outside her door in the morning with a small note that said for the writer in room 4, which made Alina laugh because she had not told anyone she had a journal. And perhaps it was only that Dora had seen the book tucked under her arm, but still, she wrote for 2 hours. Not lists, not plans, not reminders. She wrote about herself, about who she was before the Harrington Easters, about the girl who had wanted to be a painter before she found graphic design, about the specific shade of joy she felt when a design came together perfectly, when the colors and the shape and the message became one unified thing, and you looked at it and thought, yes, that is exactly right. She wrote about her own mother, who had been a quiet woman with strong hands and a garden full of things she'd grown from seed. She wrote about what she was afraid of, not in the spiraling way of 3 a.m. worry, but in the honest daylight way, looking straight at the fears and writing them down until they were just words, just shapes on paper, manageable. She wrote about Daniel. She wrote that she loved him in the way that had nothing to do with grand gestures and everything to do with the small, reliable facts of him. The way he made her laugh without trying, the way he listened with his whole face, the way he had looked at her across the kitchen table and said "I know" with his eyes full of something that understood without needing to be explained. She wrote, "I want to come home to him. That feels important, not as his family's caretaker, not as anyone's anything, just as his wife, just as myself. I want to come home to the life we actually built, which is good, underneath all the things that have been piled on top of it." She read that back. She underlined it. The 4th day she called no one and was called by no one, and she discovered that the absence of her phone was not a loss but a return to a rhythm that was hers alone, hunger when she was hungry, tiredness when she was tired, happiness without an audience. She swam in the ocean. She had not swum in the ocean in years. It was cold at first, that sharp, clarifying cold that takes the breath. And then it wasn't cold at all. It was just water, vast and ancient and entirely indifferent to human concerns, and she floated on her back with her ears under water, and the world above her was only light and sky. She thought, "This is mine, this moment. Nobody needs anything from me right now. The whole ocean is mine to float in." The 5th day she called Daniel, not because she needed to, not because anything was wrong, simply because she wanted to. He answered on the 2nd ring. "Elena," he said, and she could hear in the single word that he was genuinely glad. Not relieved glad, there was a difference. "Hi," she said. "How is it?" "Perfect," she said. "Genuinely perfect. I swam in the ocean yesterday. You did. You sound surprised. You haven't gone near open water since that kayaking incident. I have decided to let the kayaking incident go." He laughed and she laughed, and the laugh traveled across the distance between them like something warm. He told her about Easter. Thomas had actually managed the main dish beautifully, apparently, and had seemed genuinely proud of himself, perhaps even changed by the experience of contributing rather than consuming. Caroline had organized the children's activities and been more creative than anyone had expected. Patricia had made punch that was, by all accounts, extremely strong and extremely good. Margaret had decorated the table herself, with imperfect but sincere results, and Mrs. Patel, Elena asked. She told Sandra that her roast was overcooked, and then helped herself to thirds. "That's actually perfect," Elena said. "Isn't it?" There was a warm pause. "How are you, Elena? Really?" She thought about it. She looked out from her little porch at the ocean, the same ocean she'd been looking at for 5 days now, the one that never seemed to look the same twice. "I feel like myself," she said. "I forgot what that was like. I feel like I have a self to come home with." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "I have something to tell you," he said, "but I want to wait until you're back." That sounds ominous. It isn't, I promise. It's the opposite of ominous, Daniel, when you get back. He said firmly but gently, "Let it be a surprise. You've earned a surprise." The 6th day, Elena did something she had not done in longer than she could remember. She painted. Dora, it turned out, kept a small basket of watercolors in the common room for guests, the kind of casual, inexpensive set that was available purely for the pleasure of people who needed to do something with their hands in the evenings. Elena found it while looking for a second cup, and she took it back to her porch. She was not a professional painter. She had studied art briefly, had loved it briefly and fiercely, and had set it aside when practicality intervened and time became scarce. She hadn't held a paintbrush in, perhaps, 10 years. She painted the view, or tried to a loose, imprecise, thoroughly amateur rendering of the ocean and the sky and the distant boats. The colors ran into each other. The horizon line was uneven. One boat looked more like a hat than a vessel. She loved it completely. She loved it in the way you love your own handwriting, not because it's beautiful by any objective measure, but because it is yours, because it bears the unmistakable mark of you. She let it dry and sat looking at it as the sun moved across the afternoon. She thought about the life she was going back to. She thought about it not with dread, but with a quiet, considered openness, the way you think about a room you are going to rearrange rather than one you are trying to escape. She thought, there will be gatherings again. There will be family and noise and the particular chaos of people who love each other imperfectly and loudly. And that was not a bad thing. That was, in many ways, a beautiful thing. The Harringtons were not villains. They were ordinary people who had fallen into ordinary patterns that had costs they hadn't examined. She thought about what she wanted, not what she would tolerate or what she could manage, what she actually wanted. She wanted to host sometimes on her terms when she chose to, when the decision came from love and not from expectation. She wanted a gathering where she sat at the table and ate the food and laughed and left the dishes for the morning, and knew without anxiety that no one would think less of her for it. She wanted to be a member of the family rather than its infrastructure. She wanted to paint sometimes, even badly. She wanted to swim in the ocean once a year. She wanted a week, occasionally, that was only hers. She wanted to come home to Daniel and love him in the simple, unencumbered way she had before the weight of everything else had accumulated on top of that love. None of these things were enormous. None of them were unreasonable. They were just hers. She held onto that word for a moment. Hers, not selfish, not ungrateful, not demanding, just belonging to herself, the way every person deserves to belong to themselves first, before they can truly offer anything worth receiving. She looked at her amateur painting of the imperfect horizon. She smiled. She landed on the 21st in the late afternoon. Daniel was waiting at the arrival's gate. She saw him before he saw her. He was standing with his hands in his pockets, scanning the crowd with that particular expression he wore when he was trying to look casual and wasn't quite pulling it off. He was wearing the blue sweater she'd given him for Christmas 2 years ago. He had a small bunch of flowers, slightly lopsided, held at the angle of someone who doesn't carry flowers often. When he saw her, he smiled. It was the smile she had first fallen in love with, the one that didn't perform anything, didn't calculate anything, just simply arrived on his face because she was there. She walked to him. He held out the flowers. They're a little sad. He acknowledged, they're lovely. She said, taking them. They stood looking at each other for a moment. You look different, he said. Good different. Like you again, he said. The you from before everything got heavy. She nodded. That was exactly right. You said you had something to tell me, she said. I do. He took a breath. But let's get home first. The drive was easy and quiet and full of the comfortable kind of talking. She told him about the ocean and the painting and the market on Thursday where she'd bought a small jar of honey and eggs, ceramic mug that was just slightly too wide for any normal purpose, but that she loved unreasonably. He listened with his whole faith. He asked questions. He laughed in the right places. By the time they pulled up to the house, Elena felt the warmth of return, the good kind, the kind that comes when you leave freely and come back freely, when home is a choice rather than a gravity. Inside, the house was clean, genuinely clean, not Elena clean, which was comprehensive, but clean in the way of someone who had made a real effort. There were fresh flowers on the table. Something smelled good from the kitchen. Did you cook? She asked. I ordered from that Italian place you like, he said, but I put it in the proper dishes so it looks like I cooked. She laughed. "Sit down," he said. "I'll get the wine." She sat at the kitchen table and looked around the room she knew so well. The same table, the same chairs, the same window that looked out onto their small garden. But the air felt lighter in it somehow, as though something heavy had been quietly removed. Daniel came back with 2 glasses of wine. He sat across from her, in the same chair he'd sat in on the night she'd told him she was going. He looked at her carefully, the way he had then, but not with the same careful distance, with something closer. "I need to tell you something I did," he said. "You're making me nervous." "Don't be," he exhaled. "I called my mother, separately from the group chat, just the 2 of us, and I had a conversation I should have had a long time ago." Elena waited. "I told her that things were going to change, that the expectation that you would host and organize and manage, that it was over. Not because you don't love the family, but because love doesn't look like one person pouring and everyone else receiving. I told her we wanted to be part of the family, not the foundation of it, and that if the family wanted to gather, everyone would contribute. Time and effort and money and space, or we would simply see them in smaller ways, more often, more easily." He paused. "She cried a little. Margaret cried." "A little," she said, "and I'm going to try to remember this exactly," she said. "I think I've been confusing love with convenience for a long time, and I'm not sure when that happened, but I'm very sorry that it cost Elena so much." Elena looked at him. Something quiet and warm moved through her. She also. Daniel continued, with a tone that suggested he was now moving into different territory. "She also told me something that I think you should know." He reached into his pocket and slid something across the table toward her. It was an envelope. Elena looked at it. Looked at him. "What is this?" "Open it." She opened it. Inside was a card, and inside the card was a folded piece of paper. She opened the paper. It was a confirmation of a booking, a cottage, a small, beautiful cottage in the countryside, the kind she had once, years ago, cut from a magazine and kept on her desk before life had buried the magazine, and eventually the desk under other things. It had a garden and a fireplace and a kitchen, with a big window and enough rooms for 2 people who wanted quiet. 2 weeks in the summer, just her and Daniel, no family gathering, no guest room to prepare, no obligations. She looked up. His eyes were soft. "My mother helped me find it, actually," he said. "She said she wanted to do something real. Not just apologize, do something real." Elena looked down at the paper again. She pressed her lips together. She was not a woman who cried easily. She had not cried through all of this, not the years of gathering, not the group chat, not the conversation at this very table. She was not sure exactly what it was about this piece of paper, this simple confirmation of 2 weeks in a cottage with a garden, that undid her. Perhaps it was that it was proof, not of love alone. She had never doubted the love, but of being seen, of mattering in the practical, ordinary, daily sense, of having someone look at her life and say, "You deserve rest, and I am going to do something real about it." 2 quiet tears moved down her face. She didn't wipe them. Daniel reached across the table. He took both her hands in his. "I'm sorry it took this long," he said. "I'm sorry you had to go away for me to understand what was right here. I'm sorry I let capable become invisible." He had borrowed his mother's words. She recognized them. She loved him for it. "Come here," she said. He moved around the table and she stood, and they held each other in the kitchen with the good Italian food getting slightly cold in the serving dishes, and the wine waiting and the garden visible through the window in the last of the evening light. She held on to him and felt the specific, irreplaceable comfort of being held by someone who loves you, and has chosen to understand you more deeply than they did yesterday. "You smell like sunscreen," he said into her hair. "You smell like that sweater I gave you." "It's a good sweater, it is," she said. "I have excellent taste." He laughed, she laughed, and the kitchen held it. "Here is what I want you to take away from Elena's story. Not that rest is a rebellion, exactly. Not that families are villains, or that obligations are always chains. Life is not that simple, and the people in it, even the ones who take too much, are rarely doing so with malice. They are mostly just following the grooves that have been worn into things, the familiar paths, the comfortable assumptions about who does what and how the world works. What Elena understood, on a porch overlooking an ocean she had almost forgotten to visit, is something that is perhaps obvious from the outside but very difficult to see from within. When you make yourself invisible, you are not protecting anyone. You are teaching everyone around you that invisibility is what you prefer. When you smile and say it's nothing, the world believes you. When you stop saying it's nothing, when you say, quietly, clearly, without performance, "This is something, and I need to be somewhere else," the world recalibrates. Sometimes imperfectly, sometimes with friction and confusion and a few difficult conversations, but it recalibrates. The people who genuinely love you will meet you there. They will cross the river. And the act of taking care of yourself, of booking the flight, of walking the beach, of sleeping without anxiety, of floating in the ocean, of painting something imperfect and loving it entirely, that is not selfishness. It is the foundation of every good thing you will ever give to anyone. You cannot pour from empty. You cannot love well from a place of depletion. You cannot build a home for others if you have never been allowed to be at home in yourself. Elena came back from that island with a ceramic mug that was too wide, a small jar of honey, a painting that made her smile, and something more important than any of these things. She came back knowing where she ended and where other people began. That thin, crucial, often neglected line. She came back knowing that love, real love, the kind that sustains people across decades and difficult seasons, is not proved by how much you sacrifice. It is proved by how well you know each other, by how honestly you speak, by whether, when one of you finally says, "I am not okay," the other one says, "I know, and I should have asked sooner." It is proved by a blue sweater and sad flowers and Italian food in good dishes and a cottage booking for 2 weeks in summer. It is proved by 2 people sitting across a kitchen table and finding their way back to the simplest version of what they are. 2 people who love each other, who chose each other, who are, on the best days and the hardest ones, genuinely glad to be on the same side. Elena still hosts sometimes, Christmas usually, the occasional summer gathering. She does it her way now, with clear expectations and shared responsibilities and a list that she posts on the family group chat 3 weeks in advance. Here is what I am contributing, and here is what I need from each of you, and they do it, not perfectly, not without the occasional complaint from Hugh, who remains entirely himself, not without Mrs., Patel's complex system of silent opinions, not without Sandra's views on tablecloths, but they do it, and Alina sits at the table, and she eats the food, and she laughs at the things that are funny, and at the end of the night she leaves the dishes for the morning, and no one thinks less of her, and she does not feel less. She feels more precisely and more permanently than she has in years, exactly like herself, which is, when you think about it, all any of us are really trying to get back to. If this story moved something in you, if you recognized yourself somewhere in Alina's quiet exhaustion, or in the kitchen table conversation, or in the porch overlooking the ocean, please take a moment to ask yourself what you have been calling nothing, that is actually something. What are you carrying that was never really yours to carry alone? And what would it feel like, even for 1 week, to put it down? Thank you for watching. Take care of yourself today, not tomorrow, not when things settle, not when everyone else is okay. Today,